Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to another Elden Ring video, and today let's talk about the Waves of Darkness. Recently this got not really a buff but more like a fix, which in turn made it way better. Now the sweeping R2 follow-up after its initial cast deals damage, and it does have a hitbox, which I think completely changes how you use the Waves of Darkness and why you might want to build around it after 1.05. So let's begin. Now, the Waves of Darkness is something that you can get a little bit later in the game if you defeated Astel and turn in its Remembrance. You can pretty much get this or the weapon, but I heavily encourage you to get the Waves of Darkness because there's a nice fix so that the follow-up spinning cleave that you do after the initial cast previously would not deal damage. In the new update, it actually does deal damage. And when you take into account the fact that this was already a high damage, high stagger / interrupt skill, that now you can follow up with a heavy charge attack immediately after, pretty much makes it an amazing spell against any boss in Elden Ring. Now, the way I played with this was kind of different compared to how it was the last time I covered the Battle Mage Gravity build. This one uses the Colossal Greatsword. I think there's a few good reasons why you might want to also switch to this. A, it deals a lot more damage. B, it has a lot longer reach. And C, it just works extremely well with a Frost Affinity, especially since the strength scaling is still pretty good at B. In total, you will reach about 900 plus, in this case, attack rating with a 50-50 split between strength and intelligence, which pretty much puts it very close to some of the highest attack ratings of most weapons in Elden Ring. Now, against bosses, especially like Melania or even Radagon, this is just slapping everything to the ground. You can pretty much find an opening, unleash the Waves of Darkness, which not only deals that damage, counts towards the stagger meter, eventually even fully gives frostbite, but if you follow up with the heavy R2, that's going to eventually stun them, if not get them very close to that stage. And the damage is pretty wild, to say the least, even on Journey 2 that I was playing on right here. Eventually, if you do manage to trigger a frostbite, which you definitely will with the combo that you can do right now, it's going to deal up to 10k damage, which I think is really impressive given how this behaved previously. So for that, I tried to reach as much strength as possible. I played with this on an astrologer, so I tried to reach 50-50 in each. That's why I'm using one of these helmets to provide 2 or 3 more points into that. Also, the Crucible X armor set. I do want some resistances and some good poise. This gives me that, and yeah, you're gonna be close in range, so it definitely comes in handy. As far as the staff, we're gonna be using a staff with this build. This is still an hybrid, so you can totally cast spells. I went with the Gravity Battle Mage in this case, so you can totally use something like a Glintstone Academy staff. In this case, it's probably the best until you reach 60 intelligence, but obviously that's not possible with the setup that we have right now, so that's why we're using this staff. In terms of the talismans, obviously Shard of Alexander and Scorpion Charm just give bonus damage towards that magic. I'm also using an Earth Tree Favor for additional stamina, equip load, as well as the HP. And I did not have any Great Jar, or in this case a green turtle talisman, which is why I went with the pure Sword Seal. Additional 5 points into some of the most desired stats that I want with this build. So vigor, endurance, and strength in this case. Now, as far as some of the other things that I'm using with it, of course, mixed physics, definitely helpful. Pick the one that gives you 10 strength and the other one that buffs that magic damage. Both of these will last for 3 minutes, so way more than any fight out there. I've also tested this with the Blood Boil Aromatic, and it definitely buffs that damage to crazy levels, a whole 30% at least bonus damage to both the waves, the melee, pretty much everything, which is why you're seeing some of these shots reaching extremely high damage numbers. Outside of this, of course, we're also using 2 spells. I do like the Gravity Well to pull targets in. Definitely comes in handy to just interrupt enemies, bring them in your range, and then unleash the Waves of Darkness if you want to play it like that. And I've also been using the rock sling. Definitely comes in handy against bosses that tend to like move too much or just cast annoying spells. Pretty much two of these and a jumping heavy will guarantee a stun, and usually I completely avoid doing any critical hits with this build and instead relying on the waves of darkness because they just deal a lot more damage. If you happen to like stun a boss during the waves of darkness, in this case Malenia would be a perfect example, I normally then follow up with a critical strike normally, since she would likely break out of the second waves of darkness. Now of course there's also some trade-offs to the skill. As I also mentioned before, it's the range and the fact that you have to be in harm's way for the majority of the time to properly pull off all the damage. So if you are already familiar with many of the boss fights and can reliably just dodge around and not get hit, obviously just fully buffing yourself, including with the aromatic, is definitely worth it, since you're going to unleash all of that damage and you will also stun the boss in no time. If you do get hit, or if you like don't get to adapt as easy to some of these boss fights, just take out the aromatic out of the equation, since that does reduce a lot of your defenses and you still deal very high damage with the waves of darkness as it is, even if you just keep that and maybe the mixed physics. Now in terms of some of the range capabilities, as I've said, we do have access to a bunch of other spells. At the end of the day, this is a build that still has enough intelligence, in this case 50, to more than use some of the best staffs in the game. Now if you do want to go ahead and use some of the staves, you're going to probably want to head over with the Academy Glintstone staff, but you will also want to maybe take off the Crucible X armor and replace it with something a little bit less heavy, since if you go with the specific attribute points I've invested right here, that's gonna put you into heavy otherwise. So just go with something that puts you into medium back again. And once you do that, this is a really awesome build. It just deals extremely high damage. I just wanted to cover this build really quickly because I think it's totally a skill worth checking out. It's also good at kind of keeping enemies at a distance, or you can preemptively use it to just set up kind of like traps, and then when enemies walk in, they get hit by the waves of darkness and eventually even interrupted. And you can also use this in tight spaces. It does give you a bit of hyper armor, so you don't get as easily interrupted as it's the case with some of the other spells, so you can unleash and do kind of like a trade-off between getting some damage onto you and completely annihilating the enemies. Totally let me know down below if you're making use of this, if you're going back at the waves of darkness, or have you completely ignored it up until now. And I'll see you guys in the next one, so peace out.